thank you all for coming here this evening. My name is Spence Jackson. I'm the Media Director for State Auditor Tom Schweik. Here to present the audit this evening is our Deputy State Auditor Harry Otto, Donna Christian, our CPA, and Candy Coakley, who's the auditor in charge of this audit. We're going to have some time for questions at the end of the audit, but we do ask that those be of broad interest and not questions about individual matters. These audit findings are intended to be constructive and to provide guidance to improve city governance. With that, I'll turn it over to Deputy Auditor Otto to get started.
Thanks, Spence, and thanks to the audience for showing up this evening, and the mayor and the attorney. This is what we call a petition audit, and a petition audit is really democracy in action. What happens in a petition audit situation is the citizens of a municipality, in this case the city, if enough of them request the state auditor to show up and do an audit, we by law must perform the audit. So that's what happens here. It depends on the size of the community as to how many signatures are needed on the petition. In this case, there were 64 required signatures, 61 required, 64 were verified by the county clerk, and that was back in August of 2010. We entranced this audit in September of 2010. We began our field work at that time. I might mention to you that in addition to the audit of the city, we previously reported and completed an audit of the City of Lanagan Municipal Division, the court. That audit, when it was released, rated the municipal division as poor. We do give a grade. You'll notice on tonight's presentation we graded the city report also as a poor. That audit of the municipal division report, we found $521 in missing funds. We found significant weaknesses in the accounting controls and procedures. And we suggested that the municipal division needs to improve its procedures for handling case dispositions, license suspensions, and tickets. As we did the audit of the city, we considered all the concerns that were raised by the chief petitioner and concerns raised by others. Ultimately, it's up to the auditor's office to determine what's called the scope of the audit. Many of those reviewed concerns did not result in a finding. As we perform the audit, based upon what we learn as we go through the audit, we do adjust the scope accordingly to cover the areas that we find. Now, we've covered the areas, the audit years of 2009 and 2010, generally speaking, is the area that we covered. We did note anything that popped up after December of 2010, as we were still here. We would still look at things like that.
Excuse me, could you speak up, please?
I will try to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for reminding me. We expended more than 1,200 hours on this audit, and that doesn't include all the administrative hours that will subsequently be spent or have been spent. Before we began the audit, if you signed a petition, you probably would have noted that we estimated the cost of the audit to be somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000. However, we have spent more than $48,000 worth of time on this audit because of the findings that came forward. We're pretty good at estimating those hours in a regular audit, but this turned out to be a little more than regular. But because you petitioners signed the petition assuming an audit fee of not to exceed $30,000, that's the limit of what we're going to charge the city for the audit. We will not charge for the actual expenses of $48,000, but limit it to the $30,000. The current Board of Aldermen have accepted and agreed to implement most of our audit recommendations. And we hope the focus will be on improving city operations and offerings for the future, not so much to dwell on the past or lay blame in the past. you will find at the beginning of the paperwork you see, I think, something we call our citizen summary. That gives you a summary of the findings. You can go there quickly and see what we found. You'll also see that we do a rating. Auditor Schweik, when he came into office, wanted to give citizens a real quick shot of what the audit found. So we rate the audit, we rate the operation, I should say, of the city. And in this case, I said, this is 4. We rated it 4. We don't have anything lower than a 4. That's as low as it goes. So the city has been rated 4. Now, there are a number of findings. I don't know if we can get through all the findings in about an hour. We like to hold these presentations to about 1 hour. And it's very likely we won't get through all of them tonight. They are in your hands, and they're also available on our website. So if you somehow misplace what you picked up tonight, or questions come about later, or you want to look at it again, you can go to the State Auditor's website and pull up this audit. It's there with all the other reports we've issued this year. We'll issue somewhere near 120 reports this year, and this is report probably number 105 or somewhere in that area. I'm going to try to get through what we think are the most important findings, and they're in the areas of 1, 2, 3, and 5 in order of the listing. I'll go through those, and we'll see how far we get, or what the time is at that point. And we're going to take some questions. And once again, if you want to ask a question later that you didn't think about tonight, don't hesitate to contact us through the website. Contact us in the Springfield office, and we'll be happy to get you the answers. Finding number 1 deals with missing funds. It appears that at least $16,000 is missing. The city clerk at that time resigned immediately after our first visit. Many records were missing. For the 2 years ended December 31st of 2010, we believe at least $16,000 is missing. There's likely to be more missing funds than that. $13,520 in utility receipts for water and trash services were missing. $158 in other cash receipts, and $2,800 in property tax receipts appear to be missing. As I said, the city clerk resigned after our initial visit to the city. There are a number of missing records, and because there are so many missing records, we could not cross-check records to ensure we identified all of the missing funds, and we believe it is likely that more funds are missing. There were missing water and trash monies, and they were concealed in several ways. Adjustments had been posted to customer accounts in the computer, making it look like the customer owed less money, but customers were billed and paid the full amount, and so the difference between those two amounts is missing. Some checks were used to substitute cash. For example, one customer would pay with a check and did not require a receipt. This payment was not posted on the computer. Another customer would pay with cash. This payment was posted in the computer, but the cash was shorted, or in other words, taken. Some customers overpaid their city because they paid their bill, the payment was not posted to the computer, and they would pay again. They might have been billed for the same amount over and over and paid the same amount over, not realizing it was for the same charge. There were property tax receipts missing. The city tax books and tax receipt information were missing from City Hall. Residents had brought in receipts showing they paid their property taxes, but the corresponding deposits could not be located for the monies they showed a receipt for paying. The bank deposit records for 2009 showed only about a 50% collection rate on property taxes. And for the prior year, if I got this right, that would indicate only half the property taxes were paid. The following year, in 2010, however, 82% of property taxes were paid. So 50% one year, 82% the next year didn't seem right. And if the 82% is really about the true figure for both years, some $2,800 to $2,900 is missing in property tax receipts. Other receipts appear to be missing. We reviewed every available receipt for 3 months in 2009 and 1 month in 2010. Identified manual receipt slips for $158 in cash, which did not have a corresponding deposit. And since these shortages were discovered from a review of only 4 separate months, that's why we say it's likely that more funds are missing. What we do after we find things like this is we come up with a recommendation. The auditor's office makes a recommendation, presents it to the board. Our recommendation, first recommendation, is that the Board of Aldermen work with the law enforcement to recover the missing funds and pursue criminal prosecution. Every time we come up with a recommendation and present it to the governing authority of the city in this case, we ask for their response to our recommendation. And the response in this case was the city agrees with the recommendation and will seek legal advice regarding civil action with respect to recovering the funds. Finding number 2 deals with excess court revenues. We say that the city is not properly tracking tickets issued on federal and state highways to determine the excess revenues to be remitted to the Department of Revenue. And we say that the chief of police did not properly report the location of vehicle stops to the Attorney General of the state of Missouri. This violation is what we call a Max Creek violation. And for your history, for those that you might recall, there was a town up on Highway 54 some years ago named Max Creek that had a reputation of writing a lot of tickets and perhaps financing its city operations from ticket revenue. As a result, the legislature passed a bill, became law, the governor signed a bill that said only a certain percent of your revenue can come from writing tickets on speeders, violators, if it's a state or federal highway. And if a city collects more than 35% in some years, 45% in other years from this kind of activity, they are to remit the excess dollars to the state. We say that excess revenues were collected. We reviewed 555 tickets that were issued between January the 1st of 2010 and June 30th of 2010. 98% of those tickets were issued on State Highway 59 REE. Just to cut to the chase on that one is that excess ticket revenues were collected, should have been remitted to the state because they exceeded the statutory amount. Our recommendation there was the city properly track the collection for fines and court costs for traffic violations on state and federal highways and distribute the excess revenues to the Department of Revenue as required by law. The response from the city, the board will make every effort to abide by state law. The current board was not aware of this liability and will attempt to remedy the situation. Also, in the finding under excess court revenues, we determined that the chief of police did not properly report the location of vehicle stops to the Missouri Attorney General for the 2010 and 2009 Missouri Vehicle Annual Reports. The Attorney General's website instructs that stops occurring on state highways running through a city should be reported as occurring on the state highway. In October of 2010, our audit staff informed the police chief of this requirement. The chief continued to report the stops as occurring on city streets, even after the conversation with the audit staff. So the stops were being reported as city street stops versus highway stops. Our recommendation there is that the officer correctly complete the Missouri the city complete the Missouri Vehicle Stops Annual Report and properly report all the traffic stops occurring on state highways. The response to our recommendation is the city agrees with this recommendation and will implement. The third finding deals with the financial condition of the city. The city is in poor financial condition, and during the audit period, officials were not provided the guidance and control, were not providing the guidance and controls necessary to run the city. The city lacked adequate cash at the year end to pay all the city liabilities at the year end. For instance, at the end of December in 2010, the city owed approximately $84,000 in unpaid bills, had only approximately $10,000 in the general fund and $7,500 in the water fund. The city routinely receives past due notices where the city hasn't paid its bills on time to vendors, and the city incurs penalties and finance charges for late payments. At the end of 2010, December 31st of 2010, the city was 6 payments behind on the police vehicle lease, and then negotiated with the lease company to avoid late charges on those lease payments. The city has received shut-off notices from utility companies because of late payments. The city's water system has severely deteriorated, and the Missouri Department of Natural Resources has referred water quality violations to the Missouri Attorney General, which may result in court fees and penalties. The city has not secured funding or developed a plan to repair its water system. Water rates have not been properly reviewed to ensure the rates are sufficient to cover the cost of running the water system. And the city had not followed up on the significant amount of water loss each month. City officials continue to increase spending without regard to the poor financial condition of the city. There were raises given to most employees. An additional employee was hired, adding $40,500 in wages to the cost of the city. The city said this would be funded from an increase in water and trash revenues, but water rates have not increased, and the number of customers has not increased. So our recommendation in finding 3 was that the board closely monitor and take necessary steps to improve the financial condition of the general and water funds, perform adequate short-term and long-term planning, implement internal controls and monitoring procedures, maintain accurate accounting and proper budgeting procedures, negotiate payment plans to reduce city liabilities, work with the Department of Natural Resources to repair the water system. It's quite a mouthful there. The city's response is the city agrees with these recommendations, and will implement. Finding 4 deals with accounting controls and procedures. It may be a little bit redundant to run through these again because the lack of accounting controls and the lack of proper procedures really led to some of the other things we've already talked about. So for right now, we're going to kind of skip over that, except to say that the city has similar problems to other cities this size, such as segregation of duties. We like to see in accounting departments or accounting areas where there's a segregation of duties so one person doesn't do too many duties that they can't be checked on. It's very difficult in a small office to have that done. So, but we've written up the segregation of duties to the extent that they can be segregated, they should. To the extent that they cannot be segregated, someone has to check those numbers. I think our recommendations there were that our recommendations had been implemented, and the city agreed with our findings there.
each different type of receipt through this one.
We touched on park fees, fire membership dues, pet licenses, business licenses. I'd call your attention to all of those areas that each one had a bit of problem, but they were kind of consistent with the lack of documentation, including as far as, I think, cemetery plot sales, poorly maintained in a spiral notebook, receipts not available or not used. The date of the last recorded receipt was in November of 2009. So once again, a recommendation to establish records and procedures to ensure all city fees are properly collected, recorded, and deposited. The city's response was, this recommendation has been implemented. Spreadsheets have now been developed for most of the various city licensing fees. And in addition, during 2011, the year was included with date on the recent slips issued for park fees. I think that's what we wanted to say in the area 4. Might want to jump to finding 5, and that's part of the report, deals with water and trash services. The deterioration of the water system. The city water supply infrastructure has deteriorated and was referred to the Missouri Attorney General by the Department of Natural Resources on January the 3rd, 2011 for violations of national primary drinking water regulations and the Missouri Safe Drinking Water Regulations. Our recommendation there was that the city prepare short-term and long-term plans that outline all the repairs, replacement project, funding sources for addressing all the water system deterioration issues. The city responded, we understand the implications of the current condition of the city's water system. We will discuss all available options and prepare a plan to address and remedy the problems with the city's water system. Under 5.2 adjustments, the city clerk duties include all utility billing, receiving and recording functions, as well as posting adjustments to the utility computer system without obtaining independent approval or adequate documentation to support the reason for the adjustments. While some of these adjustments may be legitimate, numerous adjustments allow the concealment of missing monies to occur. Our recommendation there was that the city requires someone independent of the utility system to review and approve all adjustments, ensure adequate documentation is retained, and supporting each adjustment, documents kept that support each adjustment. The city responded, all future monthly adjustment reports will be provided to the board by the city clerk for board approval. We made a note and mention about the water loss. There's a significant water loss occurring, and we had a recommendation that to ensure complete and accurate data is entered into the water accounting system to calculate monthly water loss percentage, document any effort to resolve a significant water loss. The city responded, the new city clerk is now entering all information. She will provide all water system reports to the board for review and action in the future. We commented about the water rates. Typically, cities at some point in time need to step back and look at what the water expenses are and see if the rates are the correct amount in order to keep the fund solid. The city had not performed a review of water rates for several years, and documentation that the officials provided to support the last rate increase from 2008 was not adequate. Additionally, accounting records are not accurately maintained to provide financial data necessary to calculate the cost of operating the water system. As a result, water rates may not be sufficient to cover the cost of operating the system. Our recommendation there is to perform a documented review of the water rate periodically to ensure receipts are sufficient to cover all costs of providing those services. The city's response to our recommendation was, once the water system repairs are completed and the city water system is in compliance, we will review the rates. We commented on refundable water deposits. This is not unusual in small cities, but we found that the water deposits were not properly restricted and have been used to pay other city expenses. Additionally, some of the water deposits received were deposited into the wrong account, wrong bank account. Some were not posted to the computerized utility accounting system. And some cash received for water deposits could not be traced to a bank deposit and appear to be missing. Our recommendation there was to develop a plan to repay the water deposit fund bank account, review water deposit records to ensure all monies received were deposited and posted to the accurate customer account, and prepare an accurate list of water deposits held and reconcile the list monthly to funds in the water deposit fund bank account. Any discrepancies should be investigated and resolved. The city's response to our recommendation is the new city clerk has started reviewing all water deposit information. Once this review is complete and an accurate listing is prepared, we will work to ensure that adequate funds are set aside and labeled as customer water deposits. We had a final item in item 5, dealt with delinquent accounts in this water area. Penalties were not always assessed on delinquent water and trash accounts. The city ordinance number 24.01 states any payment not received by the 21st day of each month after water and trash billing is delinquent. A late penalty of 15% of the bill is to be added to each delinquent bill. However, we identified some customers with penalties of 5%, one with a penalty of 0.5%, and in addition, penalties were not charged for some customers with delinquent billings. Our recommendation there was to ensure penalties are assessed on delinquent water and trash accounts in accordance with the city ordinance. The city's response is the new city clerk believes part of the problems result from a computer programming issue. She will contact the system programmer to resolve any issues to ensure penalties will be assessed in accordance with the city ordinance. We have some similar findings. The next area is city disbursements. I'm not going to go through those item by item. I can take questions. Yes. Yes, in the back. Could you maybe stand up so we can?
Yeah, certainly, if I can get up. I got one question. What resources does the citizens of this town have that's located in the state? If you made all these recommendations, and that's well and good, but what if they're not followed through with? And I'm going to give you a perfect example. Several years ago, you commented there that the water department, several funds were taken from our deposit account and our CDs to pay other city bills. And your recommendation was that the city take action to put that money back in the funds. Well, what if they don't? What do we do then as citizens?
Well, this question comes up often, and what I like to say at this time is we do not have enforcement authority. We can make recommendations, the city can accept them, they can reject them, they can say they'll implement them, and whether they do or not is pretty much up to the officials and to the citizens. We can only make the recommendation. The real authority here comes from law enforcement or the Attorney General's office to push hard enough to make these changes happen. So I don't have an easy answer for you there because a lot of the answers are really all about money. And if you don't have the money to make the fix, it's a tough situation that you find yourself in. I don't have an easy answer for you there.
Would the Attorney General have an easy answer for us?
Well, probably not from funding, only from complying. Now, you know, there are other areas of the state to go to, for instance, with the the water situation, occasionally the state has opportunities for communities to finance new water systems through various kinds of funding mechanisms, grants in some cases that don't have to be paid back. But all those opportunities should be explored by the citizens and the elected officials that they've been charged with, making the city.
I can speak for this community and these citizens, and in that aspect, they have. We've applied to the Missouri Water and Wastewater Review Board for their recommendations, and we've applied for grants, but this all takes time. It may take another 5 years before we know anything about this.
It all comes back down to financial accountability. That DNR or any other state agency or federal agency is not gonna loan or grant you any money if you don't have good, sound accounting practices and good financial statements, and you can keep track of the money that comes in and goes out of your city. So that's the first thing that has to be done here. That is the underlying thing that has to be done in order for you to achieve the other things. And to get the money that you need to fix your water system and to do other things in the city.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Other questions? I'll jump into a few more things here. We do have some time yet. Under finding 6, we indicate that this is the trash service area. The city failed to solicit bids for the trash service, does not have an adequate written agreement with the trash service vendor, and is delinquent in paying for the service. So we suggested that the city solicit bids for trash service, maintain signed detailed agreements. The city responded that they agree with that recommendation. We had concern that actually the city may have overpaid sales tax, is that right, Donna?
That is correct.
That, and maybe had over-collected and over-remitted, or at least over-remitted sales tax, so we had a recommendation there that that be cleaned up. I think the city has indicated they would review the utility accounting system, make sure that taxes are properly being charged, and that sales tax returns will be reviewed for accuracy before filing. How about some more questions?
I don't know if it's a question, but maybe it would be, for the benefit of people that haven't been here before, it would be good to make a statement as to, when this audit was done, there was a different city government in place, and that this city government that's in place now has been tasked with responding to the audit, but, not to lay blame, but during the audit process, there was several city employees that quit, and the council here is, there's only 2 people, I believe, that are still on the council that were on during this time. But it's a new council that has responded to the audit.
Correct.
That's a good point to bring up. There's a different mayor. I think there's one council person that, or alderman that I see maybe was here previously, earlier. 1 out of 4. So I tried to, as I gave my remarks, talk about the current clerk as opposed to the prior clerk. As I said, when we showed up, there was a resignation of a prior clerk. We have a current clerk, and that's 2 different people. So I hope I didn't impugn anyone's integrity by not making that clear. But that's not unusual that we are addressing the choir when we give out these remarks. We're preaching to the choir and not necessarily to the other administration that might have had more input into the problems that occurred. But that's just the timing of the thing.
And if I may, I think the biggest distinction here would be the said is not, and were not, or was not. Two totally different things.
Right. When we talk about is not, as a general rule, it's during this period of time, as we said earlier. This audit basically cuts off at the end of 2010. We're near the end of 2011. This is a late delivery, but the delivery was delayed simply because of all the findings that occurred. Had this been a more typical audit, we would have been here 6 months ago, and we would have been here, from our calculating, about $18,000 to $25,000 ago. Now, you guys are not gonna have to take care of the money part of it. That's our own problem in our own office, that we need to see that our people are paid for doing the work that they do. And we're not gonna look to City of Lanagan for all the costs incurred, because we did broadcast a number before the audit began. We broadcast a number when you signed the petition. I will tell you that going forward, we've made some internal changes at the office, that's not gonna happen in the future. We're gonna, whenever we run into problems that have been caused by the city, we're gonna go to the city and say, look what we found. We can't do it for this original number because it's bad. But you guys are under the wire on that one, don't worry about that. But you still have a big liability facing you. At this time, I often get the question is, when do you have to be paid? Anybody want to ask that question?
When do you have to?
I want to know how they're gonna pay it.
Yeah.
Well, let me talk about when before how. When is we like to be paid within 2 years. All right, so that lessens the blow. The how, I've got the same answer for the gentleman who asked the question before on how to solve some of the problems that goes back to lack of money. But before you can get money for grants or loans, you've got to get the records in order. There's been positive indication from the city officials that they intend to implement, I think, every recommendation we've made. We haven't really butted heads on, that was a silly recommendation, we're not going to do that. We haven't
I
had,
think we said pretty much everything that was recommended is already been done and kind of
If it wasn't done, we
it
agree.
is being done now.
And we're gonna come back. You wanna talk about that?
well, Auditor Schweik has instituted a new program called Follow Up. That's what we're talking about here.
Is that a freebie?
I'm sorry?
Is that a freebie?
Yes.
Yes, it's a freebie.
Thank you.
It's not an add-on, but we will come back. As the mayor said, many of the recommendations have been implemented. A few of them haven't been simply because, I think in one case, you're gonna try to clean up some records and then address the rest of the problem. We will be back, I think we broadcast 90 days plus, is that right? Plus, yeah, 90 to 108, somewhere between 3 and 4, 5, 6 months. We're gonna come back, we're gonna sit down with the administration and see what's been implemented or not implemented. Well, we hope to see that everything is on the right track. And that is simply called the follow-up procedure that the new auditor, Tom Schweik, has said we need to go back to the cities and villages who have petitioned us. We've come up with the recommendations. They say they will implement them. Let's give them a chance and then let's go back and see if they did. We've had pretty good responses to that so far, and we're 11 months into a new term of a new auditor here, and we've had pretty good response on that at this point. We expect to continue to have good responses. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to say as a cemetery committee person that the new administration has been very helpful with the Lanagan Cemetery Committee, and we did take the auditor's advice about forming a president and secretary, and we do take minutes at our meetings, and we do turn them into Monica, and we appreciate the new council's efforts to help with the cemetery, and the city has paid back everything that they have previously taken out of cemetery funds, which shouldn't have ever happened, but that's why we, as the cemetery, at that time, so-called Friends of the Cemetery, we're trying to protect our families' plots and our own. So that's why we formed it, so. And I know that this happened years ago, and I don't know that there's an ordinance, but if there's not, we're probably gonna need to have one for the cemetery.
One of our findings did touch on city ordinances, there's a cleanup effort, and everything to see that they're all located in one spot, that they're adhered to. That was later in the recommendations. Recommendation number 11. We also touched, I think, on open meetings and closed meetings. It's not unusual for cities of this size to stub their toes on with respect to complying with sunshine ordinance, sunshine rules, sunshine law. So we made note of that, that in not all cases did we find that the city fully complied with all the rules with respect to closing meetings and what's talked about in closed meetings. But once again, has been versus is now, make that clear that this was for 2009 and 2010 that we found these problems to occur. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I do not live here. I grew up here. I personally find this to be overwhelming, and I truly don't know how this is going to come out. But I would like to reiterate something. This gentleman, the mayor, and Monica have never failed to be open and above board and to try to help whenever questions were asked. I only returned because of the cemetery committee, and I'm an advisor. That is the term, the advisory committee to the city council that we go under. Has an investigation begun for the loss of these funds? Can you, publicly, what can you tell the citizens and the people who are, who might read the local paper or don't have any idea of what's taking place? Please, put forth a little bit of information.
Well, I mean, we're cooperating with law enforcement.
Right. There's not a lot
Thank
we
you.
can say, but I'll let the attorney here who knows how far you can go on any problems.
After the audit report was spoken with city council, we have all agreed, city council, myself, and everybody involved with city administration to help law enforcement in investigating the missing funds. We can't say anything more than that, but I can guarantee you that this group of council members and our clerks are cooperating fully and that there is an investigation.
Thank you.
Well, it's provided by the auditor,
Now,
but it's
what agency's doing the
the
investigation?
Attorney General, as far as I know. And I don't know who all, it's either the McDonald County Prosecutor or the Attorney General.
Missouri State
And the Highway Patrol. Yeah. Is that clear? Does that answer your question, ma'am?
You did, and I appreciate it very much, and I thank you for listening.
It's important for everybody to know that because this is overwhelming, and I'm sure that they've done this before, and it was overwhelming to all of us, and is overwhelming to all